The following video contains mild math, cameo appearances, and graphic violence, and is rated B for Badugi. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome to Badugi Camp. I'm Lingo. Alright, first things first. In case some of you are wondering, yes, I am an actual Badugi champ. I even have a trophy to prove it.
Dude, that's a bowling trophy.
Doesn't even have your name on it.
I have a lot of stuff to cover today, so let's get straight to the point.
Some of the best Badugi players in the world include no one.
That's not their name, that's not no one.
And the ratio of good players to bad players is, well, let's just say it's a little unbalanced. And it's a little known fact, but the name Badugi actually comes from the American word bad and the Korean word ugi, which when translated means bad poker player.
Over the next 3 hours or so, I'm going to show you the basics and maybe even some advanced moves. You should be able to jump into a 10-20 game in about an hour and hold your own. Right? So that's a 10-cent, 20-cent game. Not bad. Now, I realize this is just an introduction, so I tried to resist packing too much info into the video. The last thing I want to do is make phones explode. The first time players, I'm suggesting you break every watching the video after getting a session or two under your belt. That can really help satisfy and clarify some refining points and concepts. So grab your favorite beverage, order out some Korean barbecue, and let's get started. It's how you go from a Badugi jump to the Badugi camp. So let's get going.
Badugi.
Badugi is a triple draw low ball variant that is played with 8 players. Each player is dealt 4 cards face down. Your goal is to produce the lowest 4-card hand consisting of 4 different suits and 4 different ranks. This is what you call a Badugi. You want to avoid pairs and duplicate suits, because all they do is counterfeit each other and cost you money. Aces count as low and straights do not count against you, so the best possible hand is 4-3-2 ace, rainbow. You'll hear players refer to this hand as a royal. And for you math geeks out there, and you know who you are, the odds of being dealt a royal are roughly 11,000 to 1. So if you wake up with this hand, it's safe to say you're having a pretty good day. There are 4 betting rounds, and for simplicity's sake, you'll often hear players refer to these as pre-draw, flop, turn, and river. The game utilizes blinds and betting mimics standard limit poker, where the first 2 rounds cost a half bet, and the last 2 cost a big bet. There are 3 drawing rounds, and because Badugi is a triple draw variant, you get to discard and draw as many cards as you like at any time. But don't get too excited. The vast majority of hands that you'll play will be 1-card draws. If you get to showdown and no one has a Badugi, then the best 3-card hand wins. If no one has a 3-card hand, then the best 2-card hand wins. And if no one has a 2-card hand, then you are playing in the softest game ever in the history of Badugi.
Badugi.
A try is a 3-card starting hand, so if you have a try 5, that means that you have a 3-card hand between an ace and a 5. A try 6 is a 3-card hand between an ace and a 6, and so on. It's also correct to say 3 to a 5 or 3 to a 6. The coolest way is to just use the number by itself, so if you were at a swanky nightclub in, say, I don't know, South Dakota, rather than saying you had a try 5, you could impress the ladies and say, "Ladies, I was drawing to a 5. The odds were against me, and it was dangerous. but I live on the edge, because that's the kind of man I am. Waiter, another ginger ale, please. When talking about Badugis, you simply reference the highest card in the hand. So a 7-5-3 ace is referred to as a 7 Badugi. A 10-7-3-2 is a 10 Badugi, and so on. You can also refer to them as pat hands, so a pat 7 or a pat 10. Smooth and rough are lowball terms that refer to the quality of a particular draw or hand. A smooth draw has excellent supporting cards, while a rough draw has weak supporting cards. So, for example, 6-2 ace is considered a smooth draw to a 6, while 6-4-3 is a rough draw to a 6. And because of their quality, smooth draws offer a much better chance at improvement than a rough draw. Okay, I get asked about snowing all the time. A snow is basically a multi-street bluff. So say you have a 9-5-4 and you pair up your 9 on the first draw. Your opponent draws 2 cards and you decide that you are going to pat the hand in position, representing a Badugi. You bet the turn and the river in hopes of taking down the pot. That is a snow.
Badugi!
So, you think you can play Badugi? It's the game show that's sweeping the nation. Here's your host, Lee Pristula.
Okay, this is how you play. You'll be given 2 hand examples, and you have to guess which one is the winner. I never said this was going to be easy. If you get one wrong, you'll hear this sound. And something really bad will happen to you. Something that includes Jägermeister, roofies, and a trip to Vegas. Like bad things happen in Vegas. The first thing you should notice is that both hands qualify as Badugis. There are no pairs and each card is a different suit. However, 5-4-3-2 is lower than 6-5-4 ace, so the 5 Badugi wins. Remember, Badugi is a lowball game, so we're looking for the lowest hand possible. Now, if you struggle with hand rankings, simply read each hand as a number. So in this case, 5,432 is lower than 6,541. And this little trick also works in deuce to 7. The Queen 6 hand has 4 different suits and 4 different ranks, so it qualifies as a Badugi. In the second hand, since the 7 and 4 are the same suit, you want to keep the lowest card possible. So the 7 gets tossed, which in turn demotes the hand to a 3-card 4. Since any Badugi beats a 3-card hand, the Queen Badugi wins. The first thing you should notice here is that neither hand qualifies as a Badugi, so you need to read them as 3-card hands. Remember, whenever there are duplicate suits or pairs, you want to keep the lowest combination of cards possible. So in the first hand, we have a pair of 3s, but we also have 2 clubs. So go ahead and drop the 3 clubs. In the second hand, same thing. We have duplicate suits and a pair. So if you drop the 8 of diamonds, we have 8-7 ace. Since 8-7 ace is lower than King 3 ace, 8-7 ace is the winner. This last hand is a little tricky at first glance. King 8-4 boils down to a 3-card king. However, the second hand is comprised of just 2 suits, so the 2 9s are counterfeited. 9932 is nothing more than a wimpy 3-2.
Badugi!
Okay, it's quiz time again. Given 3 draws, which player do you think is the favorite pre-draw? Actually, both players are basically a coin flip. This exaggerated example helps to prove 2 important points. 1, King Badugis are very vulnerable. And 2, against the worst Badugi possible, even the top drawing hand is a mere mortal. Now let's run the numbers again, but with more realistic hands. The lesson here is that even a fairly weak Badugi pre-draw is a healthy favorite over a premium drawing hand. And as you'd expect, as our Badugi strength increases, so does our equity. Now let's look at a 3-handed example. And again, given 3 draws, which player do you think is the favorite pre-draw? So what do these numbers tell us? Well, a couple of things. The first thing that jumps out is that as more players enter a hand, equities get watered down. Weaker Badugis and premium draws are extremely vulnerable in multi-way pots. This means that you can't blindly start firing 3 bets and 4 bets just because you get dealt a Badugi or a strong drawing hand. So not only do you need to gauge the general strength of your hand, you also need to gauge its relative strength in relation to the table dynamics around you, both in terms of number of opponents and the betting action in front of you. This means sometimes smooth calling with your stronger tries in multi-way pots, and even folding weaker Badugis. Conversely, it also magnifies the importance of isolating with these types of hands in hopes of getting heads up. Here's what that Queen Badugi looks like heads up versus the Tri-5. As you can see, that's a huge difference. Player 3 really is not faring too badly despite being up against a monster try and a queen high Badugi. Again, this is an extreme example, but it helps point out how it can be correct to play speculative hands given the right situations. Jump onto Lucifer, Batman. Those are some really scary numbers. If you are still drawing versus a pat hand in Badugi, you are at best a 20% dog to win with 1 draw to go. And that's a best case scenario. These numbers help point out a fundamental truth in Badugi that is often overlooked. In heads up play with 1 draw to go, your best option versus a pat hand will often be to fold. You simply won't be getting good enough odds to continue. Consider this. If you start a hand with a 1-card draw, you have at most 10 outs to make a Badugi. I know, each suit contains 13 cards, but 3 of the suits are counterfeited by cards in your hand. Remember, pairs are no good in Badugi. So with 10 possible outs, your odds of making a Badugi on the last draw is a meager 21%. But just making a Badugi isn't good enough. You need to actually make one that beats your opponent. So if you factor out kings, queens, jacks, your actual number of outs could be dramatically less, maybe 5 or fewer. With 5 outs, your odds of hitting your hand drop to a minuscule 10%. This next chart breaks down the chances of being dealt a particular Badugi based on ranges. And as you can see, I've thrown in some comparable odds to help add some perspective. What these numbers tell us is that it's much more likely for someone to be dealt a weak Badugi pre-draw than a strong one. In fact, the average pat hand pre-draw in Badugi is a queen. Now, this is a very important tidbit of information when trying to figure out a player's patting range, both pre-draw and during the hand. Now, as far as possible Badugi combinations, there are over 17,000. And as you can see, roughly 71% of all Badugis are either jacks, queens, or kings. That's a pretty healthy amount. Just about 12% of all Badugis are tens, and it really starts to drop off from there. 8s and 9s make up about 13%, and only about 3% of all Badugis are 7s. And this is why any 7 or better is an absolute monster in Badugi, because there just aren't that many strong hands out there to be made.
Badugi!
In general, the worse your position, the tighter your range. And conversely, the better your position, the looser your range. So for example, while it would be spewy to open an early position with a hand like 7-5-4, it would be perfectly fine to open with it from the cutoff. This ties in with position. Some hands simply will not be profitable based on the number of players already in the hand. Believe me when I tell you, you're going to experience some really loose games. At the lower limits, it will not be uncommon to find games where half the table pays to take a draw. This is going to affect the types of hands you play, as well as how you play them. This point is fairly obvious but worth mentioning. Some hands just aren't playable based on the betting action. If there's been a raise from early position and middle position 3 bets, you would do good to fold your 7-4-3 on the button. You also must be able to fold questionable Badugis in the face of heavy betting pressure. If you're the type to just blindly click the call button when it's obvious that you're beat, you're going to have trouble succeeding in this game. A lot of the players you'll encounter in Badugi will be loose and passive. They simply want to play a lot of hands and gamble. Because of this, you'll witness lots of poor decisions pre-draw. You'll see players frequently drawing 2 cards, limping with weak Badugis, cold calling 3 bets with weak draws, and playing starting ranges that are often crushed by other players' calling ranges. So sometimes it may be correct to play a hand that you might not otherwise, based solely on a poor player entering a hand. And conversely, sometimes it may be correct to fold a hand you might otherwise play, like if an absolute rock decides to 3-bet for the first time in 2 hours. So pay attention to your opponents. They all have a story to tell you. It's just up to you to listen. Badugi is not a game where you can be overly creative pre-draw. It's a game built around strong and sensible pre-draw play as it relates to other players' ranges. It's a game about picking your spots carefully and taking advantage of other players' mistakes. Now, it's important to recognize trap hands and trash hands and not fall prey to their temptation, especially out of position. Just making a Badugi should not be your goal. Lots of players make Badugis. Your goal should be to make strong Badugis, and the way that you do that is by starting with strong draws. So does this mean that you should never play speculative hands? Of course not. But just remember, the great hands and the poor hands both play themselves. It's how you play the in-between hands that separate the winners from the losers.
So keep your radar on at all times and always be on the lookout for subtle plays. Every little advantage helps.
Hee-yah! Hee-yah! Yeah! Yeah!
Badugi!
Okay, first things first. Any dealt Badugi that you plan on playing pre-draw should include fast and furious. Always get in as many bets as possible and then reevaluate from there. There's a few reasons for this. I just don't know what they are. No, I'm just kidding. Or am I?
First, you want to isolate to increase your chances of winning the hand. Weaker Badugis are super vulnerable in multi-way pots. Secondly, versus players on the draw or with worse Badugis, it's purely a value move. You always want to charge players for the opportunity to outdraw you. And thirdly, it's for balance. If you always raise and re-raise your Badugis pre-draw, opponents will have a difficult time putting you on a hand. This forces your opponents to adjust to you, rather than the other way around.
It's not uncommon to see a player only raise the strong Badugis and smooth calm with his weaker ones. Needless to say, those types of players are very profitable to play against. Oh, or not. Thirdly, do you recommend ever slow playing a monster Badugi pre-draw? Love your videos. Sincerely, Badugi Hauser. Not a fan.
There are some Badugi players that endorse this play with any Pat 7 or better. The reasoning is that you want as many players as possible in the hand with you so that you can extract the most value. But I'm not a really big fan of this idea. First of all, it's pretty transparent when you start raising people out of the blue on the river. Players do this in deuce to 7 and it's always with the nuts. Easy fold. Secondly, you're defeating the main goal of poker, which is to make strong hands and get multiple bets in along the way. Just think how bad it would be to get dealt a Pat 5 only to find out at showdown that another player was dealt a Pat 6. That's a lot of beer left on the table. Bets, I meant bets. That's a lot of bets left on the table. And even though 6 and 7 Badugis are monsters, they are not infallible. A strong 7 Badugi is only about 70% versus 6-3-2 and 4-2 ace. Anyone who's ever had their aces cracked in Hold'em knows that 70% is far from a lock in poker. A strong hand in Badugi is a 7 or an 8. A 5 or a 6 is a monster, and a 4, well, that requires that you do a happy dance. Much of the time, a 9, 10, or jack will be good enough to win, but if an opponent has a hand better than yours, you'll likely hear from them with a raise. Kings are pretty lousy and queens aren't that far behind. They can be played profitably though in the right situations, most notably from late position as an open or as a 3-bet isolation play. King and queen Badugis also work well from the blinds versus a button open. As a default, I'm getting multiple bets in somewhere along the way with any 8 or better. I'm pretty much never folding a 7 or better. The hand is simply too strong to fold and ridiculous to break. With a 6 or better, I am likely going broke unless I have a really strong read or I have a heart attack. The difficult zone is 8s and 9s. These hands can be extremely difficult to play without a strong read. In general, you want to avoid petting jack Badugis and worse in early position. They are going to be way too difficult to play profitably out of position with a full table yet to act behind you, especially in loose games. So, as a good rule of thumb, look to pat 10s or better. As you get closer to the button, you can loosen up your opening range to include jacks, queens, and even kings.
Badugi!
Okay, here we go. Seats 1 and 2 are early position, seats 3 and 4 are middle position, seat 5 is the cutoff, seat 6 is the button, and seats 7 and 8 are the blinds. Early position and middle position are grouped together for simplicity, since your ranges aren't going to change drastically enough to make a significant difference here. And also, all advice given in this video is relative to an 8-handed game. Short-handed games will require you to actually play a more aggressive style. From early position, your opens should be reserved for the strongest of hands, so any try-4 or try-5 has the green light. You can also open some of your smoother try-6s, like ace-2-6 and ace-3-6, but stay away from rough 6s. You need to take into account your poor position and reverse implied odds with a full table yet to act. From middle position, you can loosen up a little bit, but don't get too crazy. You can now add the full spectrum of try-6s to your opening range, along with some smoother 7s. Now things start to get interesting. Now you can add all try-7s and even some of your better 8s to your opening range. If you have a nit on the button, then go ahead and open all of your 8s and even your better 9s. Position is paramount in this game, so take advantage of it whenever you can get it. Ah, the button. This is where things really start to get sexy. Given your guaranteed position, you should be able to profitably open a super wide range here. Opens include all try-4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, and 9s. And if you have super nits in the blinds, go ahead and include any 2 cards between an ace and a 5. But remember, in order to fully capitalize on playing such a wide range, you must incorporate snowing into your game plan. So make sure you take full advantage of your position and add that play to your arsenal. Something extraordinary has just happened. You were playing Badugi and it's been folded around to you in the small blind. What you do now relies heavily on the big blind. As a default, I'm playing any try 8 or better. Now, if the big blind is a straightforward player or a piece of Korean granite, you can bump your range up to any 9 and include some of your stronger 2-card hands like Ace 2 and Ace 3. Just don't lose focus on how incredibly important position is in this game. A solid, experienced player will be more than happy to mess with you from the big blind if he thinks you're getting out of line. If the blinds actually get folded around to you in an 8-handed game, congratulations. You just hit what is known as the Badugi lottery. Since it's really hard to open from the big blind, because I guess you'd be opening against yourself, I'll go over some calling ranges instead. In general, you can be a little more lax in the big blind since you are getting a discount and you're closing the action. And as I mentioned earlier, the more people there are in a hand, the more watered down equities become. Add in the fact that there will be little chance for snowing and bluffing multi-way, and it becomes profitable to play a fairly wide range from the big blind. As a default, I would look to play any try 8 or better, and perhaps even some of your smoother try 9s. Now, as you start to play more hands in Badugi, you'll get a better feel on what's profitable and what's smart and what's unprofitable and stupid. Trust me, I've got a lot of experience on the stupid end, so listen to what I'm telling you. However, in general, it's never a poor decision to play a little too tight from the blinds, especially when learning a new game. I would look to defend pretty loosely in blind versus blind situations. So, unless the small blind has proven to be a total nit, I would defend with just about any try 9 or better. There are also arguments for defending with any 2 cards 5 and under, especially with position.
Badugi!
First off, you are rarely going to be folding a try 4 or 5 pre-draw. They are simply too strong. In fact, the only situation I can think of where you might fold is if you are facing a cold 4-bet and it's obvious that you're up against a couple of Badugis. But if you work out the math, you should have just the right odds to profitably cold call a 3-bet with these hands. Outside of a few special situations, the only try hands you should consider 3-betting are 4s and 5s, but as we have already discussed, it's not an automatic play. Much of the time it's going to come down to reads, number of players in the pot, and position. If you do 3-bet with a try 4 or 5 and get 4-bet somewhere down the line, go ahead and call expecting to be up against a pad hand. Against a random 9-high Badugi and a worse try draw, you are roughly a 25% dog. So, although you're not loving your situation, you do have the odds to call and see a couple of draws. Versus limpers, I almost always raise any try 4 or 5 from anywhere at the table. An exception would be the blinds. From the cutoff or button, you could even raise with smooth 6s and smooth 7s. A raise here isn't for value though, even though you likely have the best hand. You simply want to discourage any more players from entering the pot, particularly the big blind who would play for free. In the lower stakes games, a lot of people play their hands face up. You'll encounter many players who only raise pre-draw when they hold the Badugi and nothing else. So whenever you encounter a raise, you need to figure out what that raise means for that particular player. After 3 or 4 trips around a table, you should start to have a pretty good idea of player tendencies. When in doubt, calling is better than raising and folding is better than calling. Don't feel that you always have to 3-bet a strong try, especially without any reads. After the first draw, you'll have a much clearer understanding of where you are in the hand based on draws and bets. Then you can act accordingly. As more players enter a hand, equities become more diluted and luck becomes more of a factor. Because of this, it is much better to 3-bet a single player with a draw than to 3-bet half the table with a draw. Take into account that many players in these games are extremely passive. So overall, you are going to encounter lots of limping. Your job is to figure out who is limping with solid hands because they are naturally passive, and who's limping with complete trash because they are looking for action. Against a proven stealer, you should be happy to 3-bet any try-4, 5, or 6, and depending on the player, maybe even some 7s. You will be way ahead of their stealing range, so go ahead and punish them a little. Remember, if no one makes a Badugi, the best try hand wins.
Badugi!
Does a player routinely draw 2 cards? Does a player like to chase all the way to the river? Does a player have any understanding of odds, or does he take a third draw when the clear play is a fold? Does a player ever call a river bet without a Badugi versus a player still on a draw? If so, what is his calling range? Does a player only pat strong Badugis pre-draw, or will he pat any Badugi pre-draw? Does a player overvalue and overplay their 3-card draws? Does a player ever bluff or snow? Does a player call down with a 3-card hand versus a Badugi looking to bluff catch? Is a player capable of folding or check folding a Badugi? Does a player play his premium tries aggressively or passively? Do they ever bet them on the river unimproved versus a draw? What's a player's pre-draw patting range? What's a player's raising range on the river? Each player has a different range that they are comfortable with. Pinpoint that range and you can own an opponent's soul. The great thing about ranges and weak players is that the ranges never, ever change. They are as consistent as a sunrise. That's rather poetic, I think.
Badugi!
When you and your opponent have both taken a third draw, look to value bet thinly if you make a Badugi, or if you feel you have the best 3-card hand. especially versus calling stations or overly suspicious players. Some opponents play an insanely straightforward style and never snow or bluff. Recognize these players and make easy laydowns. Discards and dead cards significantly alter equities in this game, and unfortunately, sometimes you will find yourself drawing dead. Just like in Hold'em, players tend to play more straightforward with multiple players in a pot. Never check behind with a pat hand when opponents are still drawing. The same holds true if you feel you have the best 3-card hand. You should be able to call a raise profitably from the big blind versus 2 opponents with a hand as weak as an 8. Some players will never call a river bet with anything less than a Badugi, so bluff these players just bluff these players a lot, and don't feel bad when you do it. Now here's a hand reading tip. Players who bet still on the draw often hold a strong try hand, especially if they were aggressive pre-draw. Take note of players who overvalue strong try hands pre-draw, so you don't always mistake their strength as always being a Badugi. Conversely, take note of players who only raise pre-draw with a Badugi. I think I covered that in the notes section. Remember that players have the opportunity to improve their draw during a hand. So Joe Blow calls from the cutoff with ace 2-7 and spikes a 4 on the first draw. Now he just upgraded from coach to first class, and he's 1 card away from joining the Mile High Club, which, unfortunately, I am not a member of. Don't play 2-card draws from early position, not even ace 2. It's just not profitable. Badugi is not a multi-table game. It's very difficult to pick up on the nuances if you're playing more than 2 tables. In the lower limit games, you'll find players limping into your blind a lot. This will bring up situations where you'll be playing 2 and 3 card draws versus 3 or more players. The more players there are in the hand, the more tempted you should be to discard weak cards and hope to hit a hand with some strength. There are lots of new players to this game who have limited knowledge. You need to pay attention to everyone at the table and try to figure out who is clueless and who seems experienced. Weaker Badugis have much more value the smoother they are. A hand like 9-8-6-5 isn't nearly as strong as, say, 9-4-2 ace. Don't snow with strong try hands ever. You likely already have the best hand, so drawing is sort of like a free roll. Save your bluffs for weak tries. Pre-draw, a smooth hand like 8-2 ace is insanely more valuable and playable than a rough hand like 8-7-6. Because Badugis are so hard to make, it is almost always correct to pay off in large pots with a strong try, unless you have a really strong read that your opponent would never bluff.
Badugi!
Well, this concludes the first ever Badugi video on CardRunners. It is very limited in time, you know just enough about Badugi to be dangerous. So run off, join a game, stick out on somebody, and make me proud. If you'd like another video of somebody else, because I hate this game. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. I really hate this game. I usually go leave comments and questions, and I'll do my best to answer the good comments, like the more the bad ones. That's typical protocol for me. For CardRunners.com, I'm Lingo. Save the tables.
Hey, Brian! Wake up! Man, the video's over. Brian!